Good morning. This is Wet Lunch in the High Seas with historian Stephen Uchifusa. And a week ago, I went with my family on a trip to Belize, which 1,200 years ago was part of the Mayan civilization. And one thing that I found fascinating about the Mayan civilization is we think of it as sort of a monoblock. And in reality, the Mayan civilization, which stretched throughout much of Central America, was not so much a nation as it was a collection of city states, not unlike ancient Greece or Renaissance Italy. Uh, in the case of Greece, it was like the competing states of Athens and Sparta, and in the case of northern Italy, in the case of Florence and Pisa. So you had a similar language, uh, similar religious ceremony, but you had religious customs, but you had various kings of city states competing and warring against each other. And we visited a village, well, not a village actually, it was actually once a large city by Mayan standards. And this city lasted between, say, 750 BC and the year 1000 or 1100, which was an incredibly long period. And the city, after it was abandoned, like most Mayan cities, due to crop failures and civil unrest, within 100 years or so, was taken over by the jungle and covered over by dirt and vegetation. It's pretty amazing how quickly the jungle and nature reclaims its own. And uh, what awed me about this visit to this Mayan city was just the incredible complexity of the civilization. You had great understanding of astronomy and science and architecture. The scale of the pyramids and of the civic complexes were pretty impressive. We climbed to the top of a pyramid, which was pretty incredible, looking out at the view over this plaza, which has been excavated over the past 100 or so years. Uh, the complexity of the uh, numeric system, the alphabet, which has uh, been deciphered, the written language was lost after the conquistadors swept over Central America and South America and basically eradicated the Mayan written language. The Mayan spoken language still continues to this day. But the civilization was not so dissimilar in many ways from the Roman civilization or the Egyptian civilization. What struck me was the commonality of these ancient civilizations, the things that as much they shared in common as much as they were different, and how they were separated by oceans and continents. But the Mayans believed in an Atlas-like god that held up the earth, which they believed was flat, and they had layers of the underworld, layers of heaven, and they had a sun god, a moon god, a rain god, so much mirroring the Roman religious system of having a series of gods and having an Atlas-like god that held up the earth. And the other thing that struck me, along with the complexity, was a very rigid class system where you had the king of the city state and his family literally living above everyone else in tiny rooms at the top of a pyramid where they were venerated as gods. Unlike the Roman Empire, however, women could rule as heads of state. But you had this incredibly intricate class system and maze of barriers that separated the aristocrats from the commoners, layers of religion, layers of social protocol. And in the case of so much of human history, rich people live on hills and poor people live in valleys. I remember seeing that even in central Pennsylvania, these old industrial towns where the mills would be in the river bottoms along with the working class housing, and the mill owners would be living up in the hills in their big Italianate and late Victorian mansions. So similar in Mayan civilization. They also believed in an entrance to the underworld, just like the Greeks did. And these limestone caves served as portals to the underworld, and they would do religious ceremonies and sacrifices there to appease the gods. Uh, but also, what struck me is, along with great reason and science in the same society, there can coexist things that strike us today as lunacy, complete irrationality. And the Mayans did believe in human sacrifice, and they had a game that, in many ways, was a blend of squash and Quidditch, in which people would compete in these courts, open air courts, and whichever team won would then be sacrificed to the gods as to appease them for better harvests. And the idea of human sacrifice, whether in pagan Rome or in Mayan civilization, the idea of Christ as a human sacrifice in the Roman Catholic Church in the medieval times, the cathedral was a stage for a not an actual sacrifice, but celebrating and commemorating a human sacrifice in the form of Jesus Christ, lofting these enormous Gothic cathedrals with stained glass windows that were started with the idea that the people who started building them would not live to see them built, 70 years before these great cathedrals were built. But this was very similar to these stages of human sacrifice for the Mayans, this idea of appeasing a god. And in one of these caves that we went to, it was incredible. It was like almost like being in a natural cathedral with limestones, stalactite chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. But we canoed past one of these ledges, and we saw broken pottery, and then we saw a bit of a human skull, and we were told that was the skull of a sacrificed child. And the Mayans began accelerating human sacrifice, especially sacrifice of children, when society became more unstable, when crops began failing, when there were droughts. The collapse of Mayan civilization by the year 1000 to 1100 AD was in many ways caused by environmental collapse, over farming. And you had mass civil unrest where poor people basically sacked these aristocratic cities. But that just gave me tremendous a sense of basically context and a broader perspective of how, when it seems like you're living in insane times and irrational times, at the same time, great beauty and science can coexist in these times. There's no absolutes. Sir Isaac Newton, who independent of the Mayans, came up with these incredible laws for the universe that we still use for this day. He was living at the time of the early English Enlightenment, late 17th, early 18th century. You had England coming out of a tremendous civil war, fighting between Protestants and Catholics. The overthrow of the monarchy of James II in the Glorious Revolution. So amidst the backdrop of all of this civil unrest and religious fighting, scientific revolutions still take place. Great beauty can still take place. And a couple of months ago, my family and I went to hear the Philadelphia Orchestra perform Peter and the Wolf by Sergei Prokofiev, a setting of the famous children's tale of brave Peter taking on the wolf with his animal friends in spite of his grouchy grandfather urging him not to go into the meadow. And that was written by Sergei Prokofiev in the 1930s in Stalinist Russia. That was probably one of the bleakest periods in human history, where you had purges, labor camps, genocide, tremendous political fear under this autocrat. Uh, but in spite of all this, Sergei Prokofiev was able to set to music a children's tale that still warms the hearts of people around the world. It was something I grew up with thanks to my grandfather, who loved Russian music and culture and would play the theme from Peter and the Wolf on the piano all the time. But that was an idea that even in the midst of the bleakest of times and the greatest irrationality, creativity, science can still flourish. It's a struggle, but that visit to Belize to look at the Mayan civilization or just see a little bit of it was both very humbling at how quickly an advanced civilization can crumble, but also a sense of reason, art, and irrationality coexist. And it gives me great pause for the current times, but also gives me hope and context that life still goes on and people are resilient. This is Stephen Uchifusa for Wet Lunch on the High Seas. Thank you for listening.